Evening, friends. I'm Beau LeClair, and this here's the Dixie Tales, where the Deep South still whispers if you listen close. These are the stories that never made the history books, but live on in the heat, the dust, and the hush between crickets. So pull up a chair, tap that like, and subscribe if you believe some truths are too wild to stay buried. Now, let's begin. If you ever find yourself walking Royal Street after the tourists have gone, when the carriage wheels quit their rattling and the air hangs thick as syrup, you might notice the houses start whispering, the balconies lean in close, the shutters creak like tired lungs, and somewhere between the scent of magnolia and old iron you'll feel it a kind of hush that don't belong to the living. That's when you've reached the LaLaurie Mansion. Now, I've been to every haunted corner in this city, from Basin Street to Bayou Street John, but that house, that one carries its sins like perfume. 3 stories of white plaster and black-wrought balconies, gleamin' by day, broodin' by night. Folks call it the jewel of the quarter, though anyone with sense knows jewels can cut as deep as they shine. My granddaddy used to point at it whenever we passed by and say, "That's where the devil learned manners." I thought he was jokin' till I grew old enough to listen proper. Because behind those tall windows once lived a woman who made New Orleans shiver long before her ghost ever did. Delphine LaLaurie, the widow of Royal Street. She came from money older than most of the city's graves. Born to a Creole family back when Louisiana still answered to Spain. Raised among silk fans and silver spoons. Folks said she could charm a priest into skipping mass and a governor into confessing his debts. Beauty and polish, wrapped round a will of iron. By the time she married her 3rd husband, the young Dr. Louis LaLaurie, half her age and twice her fool, Delphine was the undisputed queen of polite society. Every Sunday she'd glide through St. Louis Cathedral in black lace and pearls, kneeling like a saint carved from marble. Every Thursday she hosted salons that drew the best families of the quarter Creole planters, French officers, even a bishop or two. Music, laughter, candlelight spilling out onto the street. From the sidewalk you could glimpse chandeliers swinging, hear violins sighing. To passers-by it looked like heaven had rented a townhouse, but heaven never charged admission. Behind the curtains, servants moved quiet as ghosts. Some came and went without farewell, others simply vanished. Neighbors whispered of strange sounds after midnight, chains dragging. Muffled cries that rose and fell like waves. Dr. LaLaurie blamed the wind through the shutters. Delphine smiled and said her cook was clumsy. In those days, polite society didn't question cruelty, it just didn't mention it out loud. Still, rumor has a way of seeping through plaster. The market women on Chartres would cross themselves when her carriage passed. Children dared each other to touch her gate and run. And the slaves, God help 'em, they prayed twice as hard when Lent rolled around. Because even the Lord, they said, hesitated before entering that house. One summer evening in 1833, a neighbor named Madame Montreuil claimed she saw something fall from an upstairs balcony, a young servant girl, barely 16. The story goes the girl had been brushing Madame LaLaurie's hair when she caught a tangle and pulled too hard. Delphine snapped. The girl ran. By the time the police arrived, the body lay broken on the courtyard stones, eyes open to heaven that didn't answer. The coroner called it an unfortunate accident. The neighbors called it proof, and yet society forgave her. They always do their own. Fines were paid, apologies murmured, and before long the soirees resumed, brighter than ever, as if laughter could drown out screams. But some debts refused to stay quiet. April 10th, 1834, Good Friday, the quarter woke to smoke climbing above Royal Street. Fire bells clanged, crowds gathered, flames licked the balconies of the LaLaurie Mansion, paint blistering, glass shattering. The kitchen slaves had set it, they said, hoping to draw help. When the door was forced open, the crowd found more than fire. Even now, storytellers argue the details, what instruments, what chains, what horrors, but the gist never changes. a chamber of torment hidden behind elegance. Men who fancied themselves gentlemen fainted where they stood. Women screamed till their voices cracked. And through it all, Madame LaLaurie stood calm, face white as the ash fallen from her ceiling. When the mob surged toward her, she fled. Into her carriage, veil pulled low, horses thrashing through the crowd. Some say she escaped to Paris that night. Others swear the Mississippi swallowed her whole. Either way, she left her sins behind, still smoldering in that ruin. The city tried to forget. New paint, new owners, new legends. But the walls kept talking. Tenants heard footsteps on the stairs, chains in the attic, weeping in the courtyard, even when it was dry. A caretaker once found the parlor doors flung open, though they'd been bolted tight. He quit before sunrise, said the house breathed. Tourists see a trick of light. Locals see justice still at work. Now, I'm an old man, and I've seen New Orleans forgive near anything, floods, fires, even Yankees. But it never forgave Delphine LaLaurie. The name itself turned poison. Mothers warned their children with it. Mind your manners, or Madame will take you upstairs. The mansion stood empty for decades, windows boarded like eyelids too afraid to open. But you can't board up a curse. Folks say her spirit wandered, looking for sanctuary. The French Quarter's too small to hide that kind of guilt. Some claim she tried to rest among her kin in St. Louis Cemetery number 1, sneaking in with the midnight fog. The caretakers found footprints in the ash one morning. Small, high-heeled, heading straight for the old McCarty tomb. Others saw a woman in mourning black drift past Marie Laveau's grave, veil fluttering. Though there was no breeze, maybe she came begging mercy from the only soul powerful enough to grant it. Because you see, down here, even the dead got politics. Saints and sinners share the same streets, and the queen of Voodoo don't take kindly to competition. They say Marie looked upon that restless spirit and said, "Let her walk till she learns compassion." From that night on, every All Saints' Eve, a figure in black lace appears among the tombs, head bowed, hands bleeding through her gloves. The air chills, candles flicker, and if you listen close, you'll hear her whisper a name, not her own, but the names of those she wronged, one by one, till dawn. I've stood there myself, foolish maybe, but curious. The ground felt cold as riverstone, and the wind carried the scent of lilac and smoke. Somewhere a gate creaked, and I caught the shape of a woman moving slow between the tombs, like she was counting them. Didn't see her face, didn't need to. Some stories introduced themselves. After that night I started noticing things. A carriage wheel embedded in the cobblestone outside her old house. The iron gate never rusts, no matter the rain. And at St. Louis Cemetery, the plaster on one wall always cracks in the shape of an open hand, reaching out. The caretakers patch it every year. The hand returns every summer. Maybe it's just humidity. Maybe it's a reminder. What makes Delphine LaLaurie's ghost different from the rest is this. Most spirits haunt for vengeance. Hers haunts for forgiveness. Trouble is, forgiveness can't live where pride still breathes. Folks who mock her, who treat her story like carnival, tend to get their lessons quick. Camera batteries drain, ankles twist, nightmares linger. The tour guides know. They lower their voices when they reach her gate. Once, a young man carved his initials on the mansion wall after a dare. That same night, he fell through a balcony on Bourbon Street, broke his arm clean as chalk. When he woke in Charity Hospital, the nurse said a woman in black had brought him in, smelling a lilac. No record of her ever leaving. Coincidence? Maybe, but in New Orleans, coincidence drinks at the same bar as fate, and so the legend grew. Every generation added its verse. Some say she wanders Royal Street looking for the key she lost, not to a door, but to mercy. Others swear she guards the very souls she once tortured, condemned, to keep them company till judgment. There's poetry in that kind of punishment. As for the house, it still stands proud, white against the humid sky, filled with tourists and cameras now. They call it history. I call it confession, with ticket prices. You can polish marble all you want, but blood remembers where it fell. So, if you ever feel the urge to peek through those iron bars or linger by that gate after dark, remember this. The widow of Royal Street don't care for gawkers. She's listening, weighing hearts, same as she did, hands once. Leave a flower instead of a challenge. Walk on with your soul intact. Because New Orleans keeps its dead close, and some nights, when the moonlight slides off the Mississippi like spilled silver, you can hear her carriage roll again, hooves ringing on cobblestone, bound for a cemetery that never learned to sleep. That's where our story begins, with smoke, silence, and a name the city still pronounces like a prayer it don't want answered. Delphine LaLaurie, the woman who made New Orleans remember what cruelty costs and what forgiveness demands. They say every ghost starts as a person, and every monster starts as somebody's darling. That's the trouble with New Orleans. Our sinners come dressed too fine to notice till it's too late. Before she was the widow of Royal Street, before the fire and the whispers, Delphine McCarty was just another daughter of privilege, born into a city that polished cruelty till it sparkled. Her people came over from Ireland long before the Revolution, settled in Louisiana, while the fleur-de-lis still flew over the courthouse. The McCartys made their fortune the way most white families did back then, on the backs of others. Sugar, indigo, a little politics, a lot of pretense. By the time Delphine arrived in 1787, the family's name was worth more than its conscience. New Orleans was a strange little kingdom then. Half French, half Spanish, all proud. Creole society moved to its own music. Lace gloves, fan dances, and scandal whispered behind every painted fan. Women learned early that beauty was armor, and Delphine was a natural soldier. Auburn hair, green eyes that could turn frost to fever, a smile that made men forget their vows. Folks said she could make an altar boy blush with just a glance. Maybe she learned too young that charm can hide rot. At 13, she was sent to the Ursuline convent, as was custom for respectable Creole girls. There she learned embroidery, manners, and the delicate art of silence. The sisters taught obedience. The city taught ambition. When she returned home, every bachelor from Plaquemines to Pointe-Coupée took notice. Her first husband, Don Ramon Lopez y Angulo, was a Spanish officer, handsome, proper, full of promises. They wed at the cathedral, with half the city watching, a ceremony so grand it made the newspapers, but the honeymoon never made it past Havana. The ship went down with fever on board, and Don Ramon along with it. Delphine came home a widow at 17, black veil and all. Grief suited her. Society loved a tragic beauty. Within a year, she'd caught another husband, a Scotsman named Blanc, banker by trade, gambler by nature. That marriage was as volatile as bourbon and candlelight. They had children, fought like thunder, and when he died in 1816, rumor said she'd smiled through the funeral. By then, tragedy had turned to habit. Folks started whispering that the Lord himself avoided her bed out of self-preservation. Her third husband, Dr. Louis LaLaurie, should have known better. Young, educated, with a French diploma and an ego to match, he came south to heal the rich and marry well. He managed both for a while. She bought the mansion on Royal Street in her name, a palace of symmetry and deception, all white plaster and elegant shutters. It said she supervised every detail, from the imported marble floors to the wrought iron balconies curling like lace. She claimed she wanted a home that reflected refinement. Maybe she just wanted a stage. See, Royal Street wasn't just an address, it was a statement. The McCartys were old Creole. The Americans, the new money, were moving in fast. The mansion became her line in the sand, proof that old blood still ruled the quarter. Her salons glittered with chandeliers, string quartets, and gossip thick as the summer air. Everyone wanted an invitation, even those who hated her. To be seen in Madame LaLaurie's parlor was to matter. But while the city toasted her grace, the cracks were already showing. The doctor's practice failed to thrive. Too much competition, too little patience. He grew bitter, she grew controlling, and the house began to breathe tension like humidity. Servants came and went. Some whispered they saw him strike her in anger. Others said she repaid the favor twice over. In any case, their marriage curdled into performance. He played the absent husband. She perfected the role of wounded saint. Delphine had her secrets, same as anyone, but hers festered in the dark. She kept a private room upstairs, one no servant dared enter. The door was always locked, the key never left her person. The cook told of strange odors drifting down the stairs, of packages arriving from the docks under false names. And every so often, someone disappeared, sold off, they said, or returned to the country. Only the city's cruelest gossips believed otherwise. The rest chose ignorance. It's easier to pretend not to hear screams through plaster. The thing about power in those days, it thrived on denial. The men who raised glasses at her dinners owned plantations. The women who praised her manners owned slaves they never saw. In that mirror, Delphine looked ordinary. Maybe that's what made her so dangerous. She fit perfectly into the world that built her. Still, some cracks can't be painted over. When the young servant girl fell from the balcony, Delphine's mask slipped. Witnesses said she looked down at the broken body with something like irritation, not horror. The judge fined her a few $100s, the price of furniture. The city gasped, then moved on. But word spread through the quarter's black community like wildfire of the woman in the big house who treated her slaves worse than beasts. Free people of color crossed the street to avoid her. Even the root workers whispered that she was touched by shadows. There's an old Creole superstition that cruelty stains the air around a person. Animals sense it first. Dogs refuse to cross their path. Horses shy away. The LaLaurie stables were known for both. The coachman used to say the horses would rear and snort every time Madame climbed in, as if smelling the devil in silk. New Orleans was boiling beneath its finery. Yellow fever, class tension, whispers of slave revolts. The rich held their balls while the gutters ran with poverty. In that mix of fear and arrogance, Delphine flourished. Her parties grew grander, her smiles sharper. People whispered that she'd made some kind of bargain, maybe with the spirits, maybe with her own reflection. Whatever it was, it fed her vanity like blood feeds a mosquito. Now, you might wonder how a woman like that could walk among priests and judges without consequence. Truth is, she was one of them. Different gender, same sickness, power without mercy. She donated to charities, kissed babies at Mass, and told priests she prayed nightly for her household souls. They believed her because they wanted to. New Orleans has always been a city that worships beauty even when it reeks of sin. But there were those who saw through it. A free woman named Leah, who worked as a seamstress in the quarter, claimed she once delivered gowns to the mansion and heard sobbing from the attic. She told the police, but they laughed. Who was going to take a colored woman's word over a lady of society? Leah later disappeared herself. Her sister swore she'd gone to deliver payment and never came home. That's when the old women started saying, Delphine didn't just punish, she collected. I can almost picture her sitting before that gilded mirror on Royal Street, brushing her auburn hair, humming a hymn under her breath while the city outside danced to jazz and denial. A woman with everything, wealth, beauty, status, yet hollow as a tomb. Maybe she believed cruelty proved control. Maybe she was just bored. Either way, she carved her name into history with a blade instead of a pen. By the spring of 1834, the masks were ready to fall. Fate's funny like that. It gives you just enough rope to decorate the gallows yourself. When the fire came, it wasn't started by vengeance, but desperation. One of her slaves, chained to the stove, set the kitchen ablaze rather than endure another night. Fire's an honest judge. It shows what folks hide. And when that door splintered under the mob's hands, all of New Orleans saw the truth it had been pretending not to see. The papers called it an abomination too dreadful for description. Preachers called it proof that Satan wore silk. But the people, especially those whose skin bore the memory of chains, they called it justice. The mansion burned, the family vanished, and for a while the city tried to wash its hands clean. But blood don't rinse easy in this humidity. I've seen the old portraits of her. There's one hanging in a collector's gallery uptown. Delphine sitting straight-backed, pearls at her throat, eyes painted green as Spanish moss. Some folks swear the eyes follow you. Others say they shift color in candlelight, turning red round the edges. I don't know about all that, but I do know this. A soul that feeds on pain never dies quiet. It lingers, hungry. Maybe that's why the ghost stories began so soon after. Housekeepers fled, tenants refused the lease, neighbors heard cries in the night long after the fire. Even the rats avoided the attic. One visitor claimed he saw her at a window. Face pale as moonlight, eyes empty, looking down Royal Street like she was watching for a carriage that never came. Some believe she was waiting for her husband to return. Others think she was watching for the mob. I reckon she was just watching herself burn again. That's the tragedy of Madame LaLaurie. She built her own cage, then locked the door behind her. Even now, folks see her haunting that mansion, hand pressed to the glass, as if begging to be let out. But it ain't the house that holds her. It's the truth. A city can bury its dead, but it can't bury what it refuses to admit. And so she walks, not for pity, not for revenge, but because some stories ain't finished till they're confessed. Down here, confession takes its time. The woman behind the mask, she's still there, waiting for the city that loved her lies to look her in the eye and say her name without flinching. Until then, Royal Street keeps her secret, polite, perfumed, and poisoned. You can rebuild a house after a fire. You can even scrub the soot off the walls and call it holy again. But you can't rebuild a conscience. Once it burns, it keeps smoldering forever. April 10th, 1834. The day New Orleans saw itself in the mirror and didn't like what it saw. The morning started clear and heavy with heat, the kind that makes the air taste of copper. By dusk, the whole quarter would smell of smoke, blood, and the ruin of decency. The LaLaurie Mansion was the pride of Royal Street then, tall, perfect, gleaming white as a wedding dress. That night, music drifted from the parlor, waltzes and laughter, the usual parade of silks and powdered wigs. Inside, Madame was hosting another of her fine soirees, the kind where champagne flowed like gossip and every compliment came sharpened like a knife. But downstairs, in the kitchen where the air was thick and the walls sweated heat, a woman was praying. Her name's been lost to history. Some say Leah, others call her Justine. But her prayer was the same one whispered by 1,000 others: deliver us. She was chained by the ankle, left too close to the stove so she couldn't sit, couldn't rest. The smell of burning grease filled the room, and the rosary she held was not for salvation, but for courage. When the match struck, No one upstairs heard it. Fire climbs faster than guilt. It licked the floorboards, found the wallpaper, and rose like vengeance in silk. The musicians kept playing, unaware, until the first scream cut through the violin. Then came the crash of glass, the thunder of boots, the shouting. By the time the guests reached the courtyard, the kitchen door was belching flame. The city's volunteer fire brigade arrived, men with buckets and axes and too much rum in their veins. They broke through the door, and what they found inside burned colder than the fire itself. The papers never told the whole of it. Maybe they couldn't. Maybe they didn't dare. They wrote 7 slaves rescued in a deplorable condition, but the truth made even the devil blush. Chains bolted to the wall, collars of iron, marks that spoke of years, not days. Men and women starved to the edge of life, eyes sunk deep as wells. Some begged to die rather than be freed. The rescuers tore the doors open and carried them into the courtyard. The crowd fell silent. Even the fire seemed to pause, as if ashamed of what it had illuminated. Then came the shouting. "Where is she? Find the witch!" "Drag her out." Madame LaLaurie appeared at the top of the stairs, gown immaculate, hair unruffled, eyes wide, not with guilt, but indignation. She scolded the mob for breaking into her home, said the servants were liars, ingrates. When someone pointed to the victims, she called them imposters. "You people," she hissed, "believe anything whispered by filth." That's when the first stone flew. She turned and fled, skirts gathering smoke as she disappeared into the carriage house. The driver cracked his whip before the mob could reach him. Hooves thundered, carriage vanished into the night. Some swore they saw her cross the esplanade. Others said she took the bayou road. No one knows, but by dawn her name was already cursed. The fire died out with the first light, leaving only ash and whispers. The authorities called for investigation, but half the judges had eaten at her table. They hushed it up as best they could, blamed the doctor, the heat, the unrest of slaves, but the people didn't forget. When the sun rose, Royal Street looked different, not from the soot or the broken windows, but from the faces peering through the smoke. The city's mask had slipped. The same neighbors who toasted her charm now stared at the ruins with fear and shame. They saw the truth that had been living next door all along. Word spread like the Mississippi after a storm. By the next day, the quarter was a storm of its own. Crowds gathered outside the mansion, shouting for justice. Some broke in, dragging what furniture remained into the street. They burned her portraits, her gowns, her damned piano. A few claimed they heard voices crying from the walls as the flames climbed again, as if the house itself wanted to confess. And through it all, the church bells rang, not for prayer, but alarm. Even the priests kept their distance. They said no blessing could cleanse a house like that. A week later, the city council issued a decree. The mansion was to be abandoned, sealed until further notice. But no decree can silence curiosity. People came from the docks and the plantations to see the place. They chipped bits of plaster as souvenirs, spat on the doorstep, swore they'd heard sobbing from the upstairs window. One old woman, a washer named Claudine, said she saw a figure moving through the smoke the night after the fire, tall, slender, dressed in black, standing at the gate with a candle in her hand. "I thought she'd come back for her victims," Claudine said, "but when I blinked, she was gone." The next morning, the ashes in the courtyard had been disturbed. 7 sets of footprints leading toward St. Louis Cemetery, and 1 set leading back. The papers printed denials. The church held mass for the misunderstanding. But in the taverns and markets, the truth grew roots. People said the fire hadn't freed those souls. It had bound them to her forever. That the screams weren't just memory. They were echoes that wouldn't fade. And maybe they were right, because not long after, the new caretaker, a man paid by the city to guard the ruins, lasted only 2 nights. He told his foreman he heard chain links dragging across the floor upstairs. Said he smelled lilac and blood in the same breath. The next morning, they found his watch still ticking on the doorstep, but the man was gone. Now, you might think all this is just legend, exaggerated by a city that feeds on its ghosts, but I've seen the records, yellowed, brittle, tucked away in the archives under the old cabildo. There's a ledger signed by one of the fire chiefs that night. His handwriting trembled like a confession. He wrote, "The heat was bad, but what chilled me more was her calm. She looked upon that ruin like a painter admiring her work." It's hard to say what's worse, the crimes themselves or the quiet acceptance that let them happen. The fire might have burned the house, but it didn't burn the guilt. That stayed behind, seeped into the bricks, into the soil, into the very rhythm of the city. Even now, when the wind shifts over Royal Street, you can catch a scent of ash and perfume mixed together. Some say Marie Laveau herself walked past the ruins that week, her white dress standing out against the smoke. A witness claims she paused, bowed her head, and whispered something no one could hear. Maybe a prayer, maybe a curse. Either way, the air grew heavy after that, and even the crows stopped cawing. The LaLaurie carriage was never found. Some claimed it sank in the swamp, swallowed whole. Others said she reached Paris, where she died old and bitter, buried under a false name. But every few years, some tourist or tour guide swears they've seen her grave at St. Louis number. One, a marble slab with no inscription, flowers that never wilt. The caretakers deny it, but denials come cheap in this town. What ain't cheap is consequence, because after the fire, Royal Street changed. The houses stayed the same, but the air got heavier. Folks started lighting candles on their porches for the souls inside the mansion, and once a year, on the anniversary, the sky above the quarter takes on a strange glow. Not lightning, not storm, just a shimmer like heat without warmth. The locals call it the fire that don't fade. I remember once, back in the 70s, standing outside the mansion with a group of tourists. A guide was telling the tale, all dramatic, laughing at the old superstitions. When he reached the part about the fire, the street lamp beside him went dark. Just that one. Stayed black till he stopped talking, then flickered back on. You could see the goosebumps crawl up his neck even in the dim. He didn't laugh after that. Some folks say the souls freed that night never left. They moved between this world and the next, bound to the sound of that crackling wood. Every creak in that house, every flicker of light through its windows, is a memory replaying itself. The dead got long memories, especially when they died forgotten. That's the thing about ghosts in New Orleans. They ain't random. They're justice with manners. They don't scream for no reason. They whisper to remind you what happens when the living forget their debt to the dead. So if you pass by Royal Street on an April evening and the air smells like lilac caught in smoke, stop a moment. Listen, that sound you hear ain't the tourists or the carriages. It's the echo of a prayer half finished, a promise half kept. The city's still answering for that night, one storm at a time. Because fire can reveal a lot more than it destroys. It stripped away the lace, the lies, the polite applause, and showed us the cost of looking away. And maybe that's why, after all these years, the mansion still stands, not as history, not as horror, but as a mirror we keep avoiding. That's the curse Madame LaLaurie left behind. The house didn't burn down because the city needed a reminder that evil don't die. It just redecorates. When a storm breaks, it don't ask who deserves the rain. It just falls. That's how it was the night Madame LaLaurie vanished from New Orleans. Justice came like thunder, and she slipped between the drops. For months after the fire, nobody knew where she'd gone. The city buzzed with theories like flies over the ruins. Some swore they'd seen her carriage cross the Pontchartrain Bridge under moonlight, the wheels hissing against the wet planks. Others said she boarded a ship bound for Havana, hiding behind a veil so thick even God couldn't recognize her. But one story stuck more than the rest, that she'd gone to France, the homeland of her ancestors, hoping distance could wash sin clean. There's a letter sitting in the archives of the Louisiana Historical Society, yellowed and cracked like old skin. Written in 1838, addressed to her cousin Augustin McCarty, the same man who once served as mayor. The handwriting's thin and careful, the kind that trembles not from age but from guilt. It begins, "My dear cousin, New Orleans has forgotten me, but I have not forgotten it." She wrote of sitting by the Seine, listening to church bells that didn't sound quite right, the air too clean, the faces too pale. She said she missed the humidity, missed the smell of river water and magnolia, missed the sound of footsteps over the tiles when the house was alive. The historians say she meant servants. I think she meant ghosts. No one's certain when or where she died. A Paris death record dated 1849 lists a Madame LaLaurie buried in Montmartre Cemetery, but the entries scratched through, no plot number, no priest's signature. It's as if she never arrived. Some believe her body was brought back to New Orleans under a false name, smuggled home by relatives too proud to leave her rotten in foreign soil. That notion might sound foolish, but this city has a way of calling its dead home. The ground here's soft and persuasive. It don't let go easy. You dig deep enough anywhere in the quarter, you'll find bones staring up like they've been waiting. By the 1870s, stories started spreading again. Caretakers at St. Louis Cemetery No. 1 claimed they'd seen a woman in black lace wandering near the McCarty tomb. Said she'd appear just before dawn, hands folded, head bowed. When approached, she'd vanish behind a column of marble, leaving only the smell of lilac and wood smoke. One gravedigger named Etienne swore she spoke to him, claimed he was sweeping the path when he heard a voice behind him, soft, foreign, half French, half whisper. "Où sont mes enfants?" she asked. "Where are my children?" He turned, and there she was, face pale, eyes hollow, dress glistening like wet silk. He said her hands bled where the gloves should have been. Before he could answer, she faded into the tomb wall like breath on glass. They found Etienne dead 2 weeks later. Heart failure, they called it. The other workers refused night shifts after that. The priests tried to settle the unrest. They sprinkled holy water, burned incense, said Latin over the crypts till the smoke choked the air. But the sightings didn't stop. You can't exercise a conscience, especially not one that never repented. Some say it was Marie Laveau herself who cursed her to walk forever. The Voodoo Queen died in 1881, but the story goes that years before, she'd confronted Delphine's ghost right there among the tombs. It was a humid June night, the eve of St. John's, when the faithful gather at the bayou for ceremony. Marie had just finished praying when a wind rose cold from the direction of Basin Street. Out of it stepped a woman in black, eyes gray as rainwater. The crowd backed away, crossing themselves. Marie didn't move. She said, "You still walk, madame?" The figure nodded once. "Then walk till you learn compassion," Marie answered, and the ghost disappeared into the smoke. After that, folks said they could hear footsteps circling the cemetery on quiet nights, soft, measured, endless. Now you might think all this is just Creole fancy, superstition passed around with the gumbo. But the city keeps receipts, even for its nightmares. There's an 1894 police report filed by an officer named Dupré. Says he was patrolling Basin Street when he saw a woman running from the cemetery, screaming about a lady in the vaults. When he entered, he found all the candles burned down to stubs and the gate hanging open, though it had been locked at sunset. He quit the force a month later, moved upriver to Baton Rouge, and refused to talk about it again. The stories grew with the years, changing shape, like the river bends after every storm. By the early 1900s, tour guides were leading the curious to the LaLaurie Mansion again, calling it the house where evil lived. They said the Madame had returned, drawn back to her home, tired of wandering. Neighbors claimed they saw her silhouette in the third-floor window, staring down Royal Street. Some even heard the faint click of heels across marble. But when they went inside, the rooms were empty, the mirrors fogged with breath. One tenant in 1908, a tailor named Beau, swore he came face to face with her, said he'd rented a small upstairs room for his shop. Late one night, as he was locking up, he heard a sigh behind him. Oh, long, low, like someone mourning a secret. He turned and saw a woman gliding down the hall, candle in hand, face hidden behind a black veil. Her gown brushed the floor without sound. He said her voice was sweet as poison when she spoke. "Do they still whisper my name?" He fled, leaving his shears and his rent unpaid. The next morning, the window was found open, though the latch was rusted shut. For a while, the mansion passed through owners like bad luck. Every new tenant swore they'd tame it, make it a boarding house, a school, even a music studio. Every one of them left before the year was out. One woman tried to turn it into a conservatory for girls. The students refused to sleep upstairs, said they heard weeping at night, soft like someone praying through her teeth. By the 1920s, the house stood empty again. Royal Street had changed. Jazz drifted through its alleys now. Automobiles replaced the carriages, and the city called itself modern. But every time the band stopped playing and the horns died out, the silence had an echo. Locals said that was the Madame, still watching, still walking. And she wasn't alone. The fire had freed more than one soul that night. Folks heard chains dragging across the courtyard, saw shadows that didn't match the lamps, felt cold hands brush their shoulders when they passed the gate. The servants, the nameless, the forgotten, they were still there too, bound not by cruelty anymore, but by memory. Sometimes tourists ask why New Orleans builds its graves above ground. I tell them it's because the soil's too wet to hold what it's done. The city's sins rise same as its water table. That's why our ghosts don't rest easy. There's a chill that rolls down Royal Street certain nights, not the kind that warns of rain, but the kind that carries history on its back. You'll see it in the streetlights, the way the fog curls just so. And you'll swear you hear a carriage on the cobblestone. Locals know that sound. They step aside, out of respect or superstition. Sometimes those are the same thing. They say if you listen close enough, you can hear two sets of hooves, one leading out of the city, the other coming back. That's the story of Madame LaLaurie, the exile who couldn't stay gone. Paris might have taken her body, but New Orleans kept her debt. She's the ghost that reminds us evil don't evaporate. It lingers, it loops, it asks to be remembered. I once asked an old caretaker why he thought her spirit couldn't find peace. He just spat in the dirt and said, because the city never repented either. Then he walked off, leaving the gate swinging behind him. Maybe he was right. Maybe the curse ain't hers alone. Maybe it's all of ours. A shared punishment for every time we admired beauty without questioning the cost. And if that's true, then she'll keep walking the cemetery paths, candle flickering, whispering her children's names into the fog, not till she's forgiven, but till we remember. There's a saying we have down here. New Orleans don't bury her dead, she just rearranges them. And maybe that's true for souls, too. 'Cause somewhere between heaven and the swamp, the spirit of Madame LaLaurie kept moving, looking for a place to hide from what she'd done. But this city don't offer mercy easy, not when the blood's still whispering. By the time word reached Marie Laveau that the LaLaurie Mansion had burned, the smoke had already drifted across the quarter, riding the wind from Royal Street straight to St. Anne. Marie was sitting on her porch that morning braiding a girl's hair when a neighbor ran up breathless, babbling about the wicked woman's house in flames. Marie didn't answer at first, just kept braiding, fingers moving, slow and sure. Then she said, "Every house built on cruelty burns sooner or later. Some just take longer to catch." To most, that was just a remark. To the old ones who knew her power, it sounded like prophecy fulfilled. The Voodoo Queen and the widow of Royal Street had never met in life, at least not that anyone could prove, but they lived barely 6 blocks apart. Two women, both Creole, both beautiful, both wielding power in a world that said women shouldn't. The difference was how they used it. Marie's hands healed, Delphine's destroyed. And that made them natural opposites in a city that runs on balance, light and dark, prayer and sin, rum and redemption. Folks said Marie had sensed Delphine's darkness long before the fire, claimed she kept candles burning on her altar for the souls trapped in that mansion, praying their pain would be eased. Some even whispered that she'd tried to intervene, sent a charm through a servant girl, a pouch of herbs tied with red string, meant to soften the mistress's heart. But Delphine had thrown it in the fire. "I need no witch's pity," she'd said. That's when Marie's prayers turned to warnings. A legend still passed around Congo Square tells how Marie dreamt of a serpent the size of a steamboat coiled round the city, its tail in the river, its mouth on Royal Street. Each night, she'd wake smelling smoke and lilac. When she finally saw the fire for real, she knew the serpent had bit its own tail.
But power don't stop at death. Down here, it just changes addresses.
After the fire, when folks began seeing a woman in black near St. Louis Cemetery, Marie went there herself one dawn, basket of herbs in hand. Witnesses said she walked the aisles between tombs, humming a hymn that didn't belong to the church. When she reached the McCarty family vault, she stopped. The air grew still. Then she said softly, "You still looking for forgiveness, Cher? You'll have to earn it on foot." From that day on, the ghosts wandering became part of the city's rhythm. Every June, every All Saints, every storm season, she appeared again. Marie never tried to banish her. She just watched, prayed, and waited. Now, outsiders might wonder why the Queen of Voodoo, a woman of mercy, wouldn't free such a soul, but mercy ain't the same as pardon. Mercy means letting a lesson last as long as it takes to change the heart that caused the pain. That was Marie's kind of curse, the kind that heals by hurting first. There's a tale told by my grandmother. She swore her own mama witnessed it. Sometime around 1840, a French priest came to confront Marie, accusing her of blasphemy for keeping candles burning for the dead. He demanded she douse them. Marie just smiled and said, "These flames belong to the restless. I only keep 'em from burning the city again." The priest scoffed. "Only God can forgive the wicked." Marie looked at him long and slow. "Then why don't he?" That priest left town within the week. The bells at his parish cracked the next winter, and no amount of metalwork ever fixed the tone. That's the thing about Marie. She understood that righteousness without compassion is just another cruelty. And she'd seen too much of that from the likes of Madame LaLaurie. Still, she pitied her. That's the part people forget. For all her power, Marie never took pleasure in punishment. She believed every soul deserved a chance to change, even the ones that never would. One humid night in the 1850s, during a ceremony on Bayou St. John, a storm rolled sudden out of nowhere. Lightning split the sky, rain came down in sheets. The worshippers ran for cover, but Marie stayed, arms lifted, eyes closed. Witnesses said they saw a second figure beside her in the flash, a woman in black lace, her veil plastered to her face, standing silent. Marie whispered something, then turned away. When the lightning came again, the woman was gone. The next morning, the bayou was calm, the lilies in bloom. Marie never spoke of it, but her followers said she'd struck a bargain, that the ghost would wander not in vengeance, but in penance. guiding lost souls who died in cruelty's shadow. Some nights, when the air smells of rain and regret, people say you can see her and Marie both walk in the cemetery, one in white, one in black, the living and the damned, side by side. One prays, the other listens. Now that might sound like superstition, but you'd be surprised how many cops and caretakers swear by it. My cousin Raymond worked grounds crew at St. Louis Number, one back in the 70s. Said he once saw two figures moving through the tombs before sunrise. Thought they were trespassers till he called out. They stopped. One turned, her face soft, brown-skinned, eyes kind but heavy with sorrow. The other turned too, pale, hollow, a smile like glass. Then they both vanished. Raymond quit 2 days later. Said he'd rather sweep Bourbon Street than sweep around saints and sinners having conversations. Maybe he was wise, 'cause here in New Orleans, the line between blessing and curse is thin as a candle flame. Marie knew that. Her magic was built on balance, light for dark, prayer for pain, forgiveness for fear. She didn't cast spells so much as she corrected imbalance. When something tilted too far into cruelty, she'd set it right again, sometimes with mercy, sometimes with consequence. So when she bound the ghost of Madame LaLaurie to the soil she poisoned, it wasn't vengeance. It was restoration. A way to make sure that the scales stayed even. And maybe that's why, even now, the house on Royal Street never stays quiet. Every time the living try to profit off its horror, sell tickets, host seances, film documentaries, something goes wrong. Lights fail, recordings vanish, batteries drain. It's like the house itself rejects spectacle. Marie's protection, some say, still lingers there, not to punish, but to remind. I remember walking past that place one summer afternoon when the air was thick enough to drink. A tour guide was telling his group how the famous Madame's spirit still haunts the halls. He laughed, made a joke about mad women and their mysteries. I swear, the moment the words left his mouth, thunder cracked, sky clear as crystal, and his mic cut out. The crowd scattered. I tipped my hat to the balcony and kept walking. Maybe coincidence, maybe courtesy. Either way, I knew better than to laugh. The old folks say Marie Laveau's curse was never about wrath. It was about memory. She wanted New Orleans to remember what happens when power forgets compassion. She wanted the name LaLaurie to sting like smoke in the lungs. A reminder that beauty without mercy always rots. That's why, on storm nights, some people still leave 2 candles at St. Louis Cemetery, one white for Marie, one black for Delphine, not to honor the wicked, but to honor the lesson. Because down here, redemption ain't handed out. It's earned one soul at a time, and sometimes 1 century at a time. And maybe, just maybe, when the day finally comes that the living quit turning pain into profit, when they remember the names of the slaves instead of just the woman who hurt 'em, maybe then Marie will put out her candles. Maybe then Madame LaLaurie will rest. But I wouldn't bet on it happening soon. 'Cause New Orleans loves its ghosts almost as much as it loves its sins. And as long as the two stay entwined, Marie's curse of mercy will keep on breathing. Soft, steady, eternal, like the hum of the swamp after rain. You can pave a street a dozen times and it'll still remember the first set of footprints that bled on it. Royal Street remembers. I've walked that stretch at every hour, sun up, storm down, Mardi Gras madness and Lenten quiet, and no matter the season, that block in front of the old LaLaurie Mansion carries a weight. It's not just history, it's pressure, like the air before thunder. Locals feel it in their bones. Tourists feel it in their cameras when the batteries die. They call it haunted, which is a lazy word for what it really is. A haunting implies something that comes and goes. This stays. After the fire, after the flight, after 100 years of ownerships and renovations, the house never lost its chill. Men have tried to tame it, bankers, musicians, preachers, real estate optimists. But Royal Street don't negotiate. Every one of them left lighter in pocket and heavier in spirit. The first to try was a banker from Natchez, proud of his rational mind. He bought the property in 1837 for pennies on the dollar, boasting that ghosts don't scare creditors. First night he spent there, he woke to the sound of sobbing in the walls. Tore out the plaster the next morning, found nothing but dust, and a single iron shackle nailed inside the beam. He sold the place within a week. A schoolmistress tried next, thought the mansion's elegance would make a fine academy for girls. Within a month, the students refused to enter the upstairs hall, said they heard a woman pacing, clicking heels, whispering bonjour over and over. One morning, the headmistress found every doll in the classroom hung by its ribbons from the rafters. She closed the school that afternoon, left the keys on the gate, never looked back. Then came the 1890s, when the quarter was trying to reinvent itself. A man opened a boarding house inside, rent cheap for sailors and drifters. That lasted till one tenant was found in his bed, throat bruised, like a rope had been there, and then wasn't. No sign of break-in, no sound. The rest of the boarders cleared out before dusk. The landlord moved to Mobile and swore off Louisiana entirely. By the early 1900s, the house had a reputation so fierce the cab drivers wouldn't pass after dark. Streetcars clanged a little faster when they rolled by, like even the machinery knew better than to linger. And yet the curious kept coming, because that's human nature. We build fences round danger, then peek through the slats anyway. I remember one tale from my grandfather's time, told in the barber shop on Chartres. Said two newspapermen decided to spend a night inside for a Halloween stunt. They brought whiskey, lanterns, and bravado. Around 2 a.m., the neighbors heard the piano start playing all by itself, a slow waltz, the kind from her old parties. When the door was finally forced open at dawn, the reporters were gone. Only their lanterns remained, still burning, set neatly side by side at the base of the staircase. The sheet music on the piano was blank, but the keys were wet, as if someone had been crying on them. Not all the stories end in terror. Some end in pity. A night watchman in 1924 claimed he saw a figure on the balcony, a woman gazing down Royal Street as if waiting for company. He called out, asking if she needed help. She turned her head. "They still suffer," she said, and vanished. The watchman said he felt a sudden wave of sorrow so heavy he sat on the curb and wept without knowing why. That's the kind of ghost Madame LaLaurie became, not just a monster, but a memory with teeth. A reminder that evil done in secret never stays buried, it just changes rooms. The hauntings never followed a pattern. Sometimes it's sound, chains dragging, doors slamming, a child's moan that fades when you reach for it. Sometimes it's smell, lilac, iron, and smoke, mixing in the humidity like perfume on rot. And sometimes it's touch. Folks swear to feel a cold hand brush their cheek or fingers at their throat, gentle but warning. I met one man who laughed at all that. Local guide, sharp suit, sharp tongue. He made a living mocking the legends, telling tourists that fear was good for tips. One summer evening, he staged a prank, hid speakers in the courtyard to play fake screams. The crowd screamed back, laughed, applauded, but when he went to shut the system down, the speakers were dead, power cords melted like wax. That night, he dreamed of a woman in black hovering over him, whispering, "Do you think it's funny now?" Next morning, he quit the business, left the quarter, never said her name again. Ain't every story tragic, though. Some say redemption lives in that house, same as punishment. There's an old caretaker, still breathing last I heard, who swears that one night he saw light spill from the attic windows, soft, golden, like sunrise. In that glow stood shapes, dozens of them, faceless yet peaceful. They weren't screaming, he told me. They were praying. When he blinked, it was gone. He figured maybe Marie Laveau was keeping watch, letting the hurt souls rest for one night at least. Maybe, or maybe the house was remembering better days before cruelty soaked into its boards. Down here, memory's stronger than blessing. During the Second World War, the mansion was converted into apartments. Desperation always finds tenants. Soldiers, factory workers, jazzmen between gigs. The police blotter from that decade reads like scripture for the damned. Strange noises, missing pets, fires that start cold. One tenant reported a child running through the hall at 3 a.m., giggling. There were no children in the building. Another found her mirror fogged with a phrase traced by an unseen finger. We remember. She moved out the next day. Every renovation since has failed the same way. Builders find their tools misplaced, blueprints warped by water that isn't there. Paint won't dry right. Cracks appear in the shape of hands. When they finally step back, the walls seem to breathe. One foreman told me, "That house exhales like it's tired of us." He refused to take the paycheck, said he wouldn't be paid for disturbing the dead, and still the city profits from it. Postcards, t-shirts, guided walks. We package pain neat and sell it by the hour. But the house don't like commerce. Every time the cash registers ring too loud, the lights flicker. Call it Marie's mercy or Delphine's warning. Same coin, different sides. I reckon the most unnerving part of Royal Street ain't what you see, it's what sees you. Stand out front long enough, you'll feel it. A prickling behind the neck like eyes watching from the upper windows. Folks claim photographs show a woman there, pale face, mouth tight, eyes like two coins. Skeptics call it reflection. Believers call it justice. Once, in 1989, a film crew got permission to shoot inside for a documentary. They lasted half a night. Cameras jammed. Temperature dropped 20 degrees. Crew chief collapsed with what doctors later called sudden cardiac arrhythmia. The footage they salvaged showed a single frame of light flickering across the hallway, shaped like a hand reaching out. They destroyed the reels. The director left the industry. Now, I'm not saying all this to scare you. Fear's cheap. I'm saying it because every city's got a conscience, and this house is ours. It's the bruise we poke just to see if it's still sore. And it is. Sometimes, late at night, I'll walk that stretch of Royal Street, tip my hat to the iron balcony, and swear I hear her whisper back. Not a threat, not even regret, just a weary sigh, like a lesson repeating itself for the 100th time. The wind carries it toward the cathedral, where the bells answer faintly. The city's duet of sin and salvation. Ain't no preacher alive can tell you what truly haunts that place. Maybe it's the souls she hurt, maybe it's her own grief, or maybe it's us, the living, who keep reopening the wound. 'Cause the more I learn, the more I think ghosts don't cling to evil. They cling to curiosity. They stay where folks keep remembering, where their stories get retold till memory turns into invitation. And Lord, New Orleans does love to invite the past in for a drink. So if you ever visit, do it proper. Bring respect, not laughter. Walk quiet. Feel the weight in the air, that pulse under your feet. That's history breathing, reminding you that beauty can be deadly when it forgets kindness. Look up at those wrought iron balconies. You might see a shadow there, veil drifting, though there's no wind. Don't speak. Just nod, tip your hat, and move on. Because Royal Street ain't just haunted by Madame LaLaurie. It's haunted by everyone who let her thrive. The guests who toasted her table, the priests who blessed her lies, the neighbors who kept their shutters closed. The whole city dances to their echo still. And when you hear the faint sound of a piano from somewhere high above, a few notes, sweet and broken, remember, that ain't music, that's confession. The kind that never ends. They say St. Louis Cemetery ain't a place for the dead, it's a waiting room. You can feel it soon as the gate closes behind you. The air thickens, sound dulls, Even the light seems to slow down, like the sun's afraid to trespass too deep. Marble tombs crowd together, shoulder to shoulder, like sinners at confession, all whispering their secrets in stone. I've walked that ground more times than I can count. Mornings when the mist still clings to the graves like a veil, evenings when the candles flicker low, and every time I pass the McCarty vault, I feel that old pressure again. The kind that makes the air buzz in your ears. The guides tell you it's humidity. I tell you it's history remembering your name. Most folks come here looking for Marie Laveau, leaving lipstick X's on her tomb like the old stories tell. They mean well, bless 'em. But if you linger too long, past the crowd and the chatter, you'll notice another corner. Quieter, colder, where the moss grows thicker on the walls. That's where she stays. The other queen of the quarter. The one whose prayers went unanswered. Madame Delphine LaLaurie. Her name ain't marked proper. Never was. No epitaph, no dates, no flowers that last the night. Just a worn slab of marble cracked down the middle like the earth tried to spit her out. The caretakers deny it's hers. Say she's buried overseas. But the locals know better. The dead travel light, and they always come home. The first sighting came in 1884, 50 years after the fire. A gravedigger named Baptiste was finishing his rounds when he noticed a woman standing near the McCarty tomb. Black lace dress, gloved hands, head bowed. He thought she was mourning, so he tipped his hat and kept walking. But when he turned back, she was gone. The next morning he found fresh lilac petals scattered across the stone, out of season, out of place. A year later, another worker saw her again. Same hour, same dress. This time she raised her head. He said her eyes weren't eyes at all, just two pale circles, like candle smoke caught in a jar. He quit the next day, said he'd had enough of ghosts with manners. By the turn of the century, she'd become part of cemetery lore. Some called her the widow of the tombs, others the weeping lady. The brave, or the foolish, came hoping to catch a glimpse. Most left with nothing but goose flesh and a broken flashlight. A few left with more. In 1903, a tourist from Chicago wrote to the Picayune newspaper describing how she'd felt a cold hand take hers while she prayed near Marie Laveau's grave. Thought it was a trick of imagination till she noticed her palm smeared with soot and smelled lilac on her sleeve. The editors laughed. The locals didn't. See, around here, a haunting ain't just a ghost story. It's a sermon. Every spirit has a reason for lingering. And Delphine's reason was simple. She couldn't stand the silence. They say at night, when the moon sits low and the city noise fades, you can hear her moving among the vaults, not walking, gliding, like her feet barely touch the gravel, the sound of her lace dress swishing through the air, the faint click of heels that never hit the ground. Sometimes she hums, a slow waltz, the same tune that played the night the fire took her house. Sometimes she cries. The tears ain't for the ones she hurt. They're for herself, the woman she pretended to be. Down here, that's the cruelest kind of grief, when the mirror finally talks back. One story that's made the rounds came from a caretaker named Rosa. She said she'd been closing the gates one evening when she saw a woman kneeling before the McCarty tomb, head bent in prayer. Rosa figured it was another mourner who'd lost track of time, so she called out, "Ma'am, it's closing hours." The woman turned, and Rosa swore her face was gray as marble, lips bloodless. "Don't lock me out," the ghost said, voice soft as rain. "I've nowhere else to go." Rosa left the gate open that night. It was still open in the morning. There's mercy and fear sometimes. Then came the storm years. Hurricanes always stir the dead. They shuffle in their tombs, restless, remembering. After Katrina, the cemetery was half underwater. Marble tombs cracked, coffins dislodged. But the one folks claimed to be hers stood untouched, dry as bone, flowers still bright. A film crew recording cleanup footage caught something strange on tape. A shape in the fog, woman-shaped, moving against the wind. They blamed lens flare. The old men on Basin Street shook their heads. "That's her," they said. "The lady who don't drown." Some priests tried again to cleanse the place. Holy water, rosaries, Latin chants. They said the cemetery needed purifying from pagan worship and morbid fascination. But the wind picked up mid-prayer, scattering their candles. One priest swore he heard laughing in the gusts. Not mocking, more weary, like someone who'd seen 1,000 rituals and knew none would stick. It ain't that she's evil now, it's that she's empty, a ghost too proud to beg for forgiveness, too cursed to stop seeking it. I spoke once with a woman who swore she'd seen both queens together, Marie and Delphine, walking side by side in the mist. Said Marie wore white, calm as a saint, and Delphine in black, her face hidden. They stopped before the McCarty vault. Marie whispered something, touched Delphine's arm, and the black veil lifted just enough to show a flicker of light beneath. Not fire, not halo, something in between. "Maybe mercy," the woman said. "Maybe judgment. The church don't put that in its sermons, but the city knows every saint's got a sinner for a shadow." By the 1970s, when tourists began flooding the quarter with cameras and curiosity, the hauntings turned polite. The ghost learned to hide from flashbulbs, appearing only to those who come quiet. I know a photographer who went there at dawn, hoping for authentic atmosphere. He got more than he bargained for. The first 2 shots came out fine. The third showed a figure standing behind him, woman, tall, head bowed, hand resting on his shoulder. He didn't see her till he developed the film. Swore off cemeteries after that. The locals keep their distance but bring offerings just the same, not flowers. The living have claimed those for Marie. But candles, tiny ones, burnt to stubs. Each one a small act of acknowledgement. We see you, we ain't forgot. There's one more story I can't shake, told to me by a sax player named Lionel who used to wander the quarter late at night, playing for tips. One foggy evening, he stopped by the cemetery gate, leaned against the fence, and started blowing a slow blues, a tune called Sins of the City. When he finished, he heard a woman's voice behind him say, "Play it again, but softer." He turned, saw no one, but felt a chill wrap around him like a shawl. He played till dawn. The next day, his hat was full of lilac petals. Maybe that's her way of saying thank you. Maybe that's her purgatory, to listen till every sorrow's been sung. Whatever the truth, the people of New Orleans learned to live with her. The same way we live with rain, sometimes gentle, sometimes ruinous, always expectant. The tours still come, the candles still burn, and every time a storm threatens the Gulf, more offerings appear at that cracked tomb. Because down here, we know that protection don't always come from saints. Sometimes it comes from those who've learned the cost of cruelty firsthand. So if you find yourself wandering through St. Louis Cemetery on a heavy afternoon, when the sky feels too close and the air too still, listen. You might hear footsteps that ain't yours, or a sigh that don't belong to the wind. Don't run, don't speak, just bow your head and walk gentle. Because the ghost that walks those aisles ain't looking to hurt you. She's looking for someone to remember her as more than the monster she became. And that, I reckon, is punishment enough. There's an hour in New Orleans when the sun's gone, but the sky ain't dark yet. That soft, in-between light where everything turns gold before it goes gray. Folks around here call it the mercy hour. That's when the city looks her best and worst all at once. and I reckon that's when her ghosts walk easiest. I sit on my porch sometimes, listening to the river hum and the streetcars groan, and I think about those two women who shaped this town more than any mayor or general ever did, Marie Laveau and Delphine LaLaurie. One born to heal, one to harm, yet somehow their stories keep dancing together like a hymn and its echo. You can't speak one name in New Orleans without hearing the other breathe right behind it. That's the thing about this place. It don't separate good and evil the way church books do. Down here, the two live side by side, share the same porches, light candles from the same flame. Every saint needs a sinner, or else who would she redeem? And every sinner needs a saint, or else who'd remind her mercy still exists. Marie Laveau knew that. Maybe that's why she never banished the widow of Royal Street outright. Maybe she understood that even the darkest spirit can serve the light if left to wander long enough. I like to think that's what her curse of mercy was all about. Not destruction, but balance. New Orleans runs on balance, always has. River and sea, rich and poor, prayer and temptation. We walk that line every day, trying not to fall one way or the other. Some folks dance it graceful, others stumble like drunk angels. But the line holds, because every generation remembers the stories that built it. And Delphine's story, Lord, it's the heaviest of them all. You see, the LaLaurie Mansion still stands. Fresh coat of paint, new ironwork, different owners every decade. Some treat it like a trophy, others like a burden, but none keep it long. The walls don't let you forget. Walk inside, and you'll notice how quiet it is. A dead quiet that presses against your ribs. The air smells faintly of wax and rain. Mirrors fog without reason. Somewhere, a door clicks shut by itself. Maybe wind, maybe memory. This city don't much care for distinctions, and yet the tourists line up. They come from all over, hungry for chills, clutching cameras, whispering about America's most haunted house. They point at the windows, take their selfies, then go back to their hotels and forget. But the locals keep their voices low when they pass. They cross themselves or tip their hats, not out of superstition, but manners. In Louisiana, we still mind our manners with the dead. One night I walked that block after a rainstorm. The street lamps were haloed with mist, the cobblestones slick as glass. I stopped across from the mansion, listened. From somewhere deep inside came a sound like a single piano. Key struck, slow. One note hanging in the air, mournful as a church bell underwater. I stood there a long minute, hat in hand, till it faded. Then I said, "All right, ma'am, I hear you." Because sometimes acknowledgement is the only exorcism a place needs. I don't think Delphine LaLaurie walks Royal Street looking for victims anymore. I think she walks it remembering what she did, what she lost, and what mercy looks like from the outside. Maybe that's why her ghost never leaves St. Louis Cemetery. She's still learning how to kneel. And maybe Marie Laveau, wherever she is, still keeps a candle lit for her. Two queens of the same city, one crown made of compassion, the other of consequence. Together, they hold the soul of New Orleans steady, like bookends on the same shelf of history. Without one, the other would tip and fall. I once heard an old preacher say, "The devil don't live in New Orleans, he rents." I reckon that's true. Evil don't build houses here anymore. It just borrows space till guilt catches up. The people here, we've learned to share the block with our shadows. We drink, we dance, we confess, sometimes all in the same hour. And maybe that's why the city still breathes, because we never stop talking to our ghosts. The tourists ask me, "Do you believe in the haunting, Mr. LeClair?" I tell them, "Child, in this town belief ain't a choice. It's the rent we pay for surviving. When the hurricanes come, folks still leave candles at both tombs. White for Marie, black for Delphine. They pray for protection, but also for peace. 'Cause deep down we know, if those two ever make amends, maybe the whole city will rest a little easier. Sometimes I imagine them sitting together on one of those marble benches after midnight, the Voodoo Queen and the widow of Royal Street, the moonlight catching the lace on one, the beads on the other. No anger left, no pride, just two tired women talking about how the world forgets the lessons it swore it learned. Maybe they laugh a little. Maybe Marie reaches over and says, "You learned the hard way, Cher, but you learned." And Delphine, she nods, whispering, "Keep the light burning for me." That's how I like to think it ends, not with screams or storms, but with understanding, the kind that comes too late for the living, but right on time for eternity. You stand in St. Louis Cemetery long enough, you'll feel it, that faint tremor underfoot, like the ground breathing. It's not the dead stirring, it's the city remembering. Every sin, every kindness, every story told by candlelight until the telling itself becomes a prayer. That's New Orleans, a patchwork quilt of guilt and grace, stitched together with jazz and rum and the stubborn refusal to stay buried. So, what's the curse of Madame LaLaurie truly? Not the haunting, not the horror, not even the whispers that still curl through her hallways. The curse is remembrance, that her name, no matter how the city tries to sand it down, will always remind us what happens when beauty outpaces conscience. And maybe that's a mercy too, because forgetting would be the greater sin. When I leave the cemetery, I always glance back once. Some habits die slower than ghosts. I see the white tombs shimmering under moonlight, the iron gates breathing with rust, and somewhere in the distance, a faint hum. Could be wind. Could be a woman singing to herself. I don't question it anymore. I just whisper, "Rest easy, ladies. We're still listening." 'Cause if this city's got a soul, it's theirs. Stitched from mercy and madness, faith and fire, a duet that never ends. And that's why, when folks ask me why I stay in a place where the ground's too wet for graves and the past won't stay quiet, I just smile. I tell 'em, because down here, even our ghosts got stories worth telling. The night folds back in around me, the air thick with magnolia and memory, and somewhere far off a piano starts playing again, that same slow waltz that's haunted this city for near 200 years. Maybe it's a warning, maybe it's forgiveness, maybe it's just New Orleans singing herself to sleep. Either way, I listen till the last note fades, because some stories ain't meant to end. They're meant to echo, and down here, the echo always sounds a lot like grace.